Eddie was waiting for me. This happened a couple years ago, but I feel like I'm talking about it. I'm ready now. In 2016, I just turned 18 years old and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. That's relevant, because I was going to a town that I didn't know much about, and I didn't know anyone who lived there. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5 foot nothing, and at the time was about 130 pounds, which is just to say I was pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab with these classes, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time, and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit, and was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overtly friendly to me and would stand too close and ask too many personal questions. He'd flirt with me in class, to the point it seemed like it was making other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to ignore it as best as I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me. There wasn't a lot I felt like I could do, right? A few weeks after that started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table, chatting with some middle-aged woman in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up. As I did, he tried and failed to discreetly turn his phone towards me and snap pictures of me as I walked to the machine, got my drink, and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, and I shot him a look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly, I was really just freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near tears, telling him what happened. He was angry and said that I need to tell someone, but I said no, I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 p.m. and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we all walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a second, and looked at me through the windshield, then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below zero, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided I need to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was so nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office, and I told her about Eddie and what he had done and how he acted weird towards me. She told me that she had noticed I tensed up and went quiet when he got close to me, and noticed him paying a lot of attention to me, extra attention to me, and told me she believed me about the pictures. She was honestly amazing with how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab, and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said that she'd respect that, but she was going to have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and she'd tell the program director what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I talked to her. By the time we had got it done, it was about 30 minutes since class had ended, and she offered to walk me outside. I'm glad that she did, because when we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting in the foyer alone. Everyone else had gone home. My blood ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see our professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still there, and he said he noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk out by myself. I'm pretty sure I was pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She's walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard will be there every night. He said that was good, and quickly said goodnight and left. It sent chills thinking about what could have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of. After this, she rearranged our seatings, made sure we never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple months left of class, so there wasn't really any other incidences, but I still caught him staring at me sometimes, and he looked like pure rage. It's been a few years. I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. I'm a lot more assertive and stronger now, but Eddie, you fucking creep. Let's not meet again. Crazy Eddie! In the heyday of my misspent youth, I hung around with a guy named Clark. He used to have a few crazy parties every weekend. One Saturday night, when several of us were drinking hard, there was a knock on the door. Clark answered it and returned with 3 big Charles Manson lookalikes. Apparently, these 3 hillbilly-looking dudes were acquaintances of Clark's who were in some outlaw biker gang. They were at a house across the street when they saw the lights on and decided to come over and cage a few beers from us. These dudes had a somewhat sobering effect on all of us. It was obvious they were mixed up in heavy shit. Clark introduced them as Jeff, Jeffro, and Eddie. The 3 bikers had arrived at the tail end of the party, so after a couple of final drinks, I decided to call it a night. As I was saying farewell, an acquaintance of mine named Derek asked if I needed a ride. He was a bit of a fitness nut and hadn't been drinking, so I agreed. As we pulled out of the parking lot, Derek suddenly became all serious. "That Eddie guy is one scary dude," he stated. I looked in his eyes, and there was nothing looking back. It was like looking in the eyes of a corpse. Derek was quite unnerved by Eddie's demeanor, and was sufficiently creeped out by him that he offered me a ride as an excuse to get away from him. He dropped me off and I went to bed. A few weeks later, I was sleeping off at drunk at Clark's when I was awoken by the sound of someone revving of a big block engine with an obnoxiously loud exhaust system. Clark came flying out of his bedroom looking to scream at this asshole who woke us up. He got to the window and then stopped. "Oh, that's Crazy Eddie," he stated. That guy's killed before." I looked at the window to see the same Charles Manson-like dude that creeped out Derek a couple weeks before. "What do you mean he killed someone?" I asked. Clark went on to tell me that Eddie was an enforcer of the biker gang who had spent over half his life in prison. He had done time for kidnapping some chick and repeatedly raping her over a period of days, and at one time broke a 4-year-old kid's arm when the kid's father couldn't pay Eddie for a drug debt. Contract murder was another of Eddie's specialties, but I thought it was best not to ask. Something wicked in Birmingham. Back in 2008, I was a junior in college. At the time, I was dating a guy that was particularly into jam bands, widespread panic specifically. To fill folk in on the panic fans, spreadheads if you will, they have a tendency to follow the band from city to city. If you live in the southeastern United States, you are a panic fan. Touring season is a busy time for you. Even though they're not really my cup of tea, I accompanied my ex on a few panic adventures. Over the course of roughly a year, I saw the band 12 times. Before I proceed any further, I want to let you know that some of the information I'm including may seem pointless, but I'm providing it to give you a better picture of the scenario. In other words, bear with me, folks. When I look back on it, particularly part of the attraction I had to my ex was that he was different from any other guys I've met. When I say he was into panic, he was really into widespread motherfucking panic. He had been going to at least 10 shows a year since the age of 14 years old. He had been selling drugs since around the same time as well. He was a good-looking guy. So panic concerts were both business and pleasure, I guess. By the time I met him, he had gotten legit and had an actual career. He was somewhat clean-shaven, but had some of the sketchiest friends you could imagine. Still good-looking, though. I always enjoyed meeting his friends, just for the experience, if that makes sense. One of his friends was a guy named Eddie. Now, Eddie was a particularly intense guy who traveled to every show with a plethora of psychedelics to peddle. While Eddie liked to party, he had an amazing ability to keep his head above things, and ultimately was not someone to fuck with. If we found out Eddie was going to be at a show, we made it a point to stop by and hang out with him. He usually had a nice room, snacks, and booze, so it made for a nice pre- or post-concert stop, I guess. Drugs weren't really my thing, though, so I turned these adventures into the ultimate spectator sport. Eddie, of course, was busy having fun and making money. It was your typical setup. Customers got what they wanted and got the hell out. Usually I just kept silent and to myself. Like I said before, Eddie always kept things calm, and he didn't appreciate any issues. I usually didn't get super excited for shows, honestly. I really just went because I got to spend time with Joe, my ex. He really loved going, and it made me happy to see him happy. Therefore, I could get past the 35-minute weird solos by JoJo and being hit in the face with smelly dreads belonging to wannabe hippies, you know? When the time came for a show in Birmingham, Alabama, Joe was beyond excited for it. Not only was it a short 3-hour ride from my college to there, but the Birmingham show have a reputation. Anyone in the Panic scene will tell you the Birmingham shows have some of the most popular and are one of the most popular. In short, they're the dirty shows. Most Panic shows come with a lot of drugs involved, but the Birmingham shows are exceptional. While I wasn't necessarily interested in the drugs, I was pretty excited that one of my roommates, Angie, and Joe's cousin Jason were coming with us. On top of that, Eddie let Joe know he was coming as well. We were even more excited to find that Eddie had gotten a room right beside the venue. Therefore, plans were set, tickets were bought, and we were off to Birmingham. The shows did not disappoint. DEA agents searched everyone at the doors of the arena, but I've never encountered that level of smoke, pills, vomit, and piss in my life. After a long, dirty show, we headed to Eddie's room. Everyone was rolling pretty hard except for me. As I herded everyone to Eddie's floor, we got to his room and knocked on the door. No response. Joe decided to call him, but got no answer. He decided he was still in the show or maybe in the lot doing business. The whole hotel was partying, so we just decided to sit there and collect ourselves. Finally, after goofing around and talking in the hallway, we realized we had been sitting in front of Eddie's room for almost an hour. Everyone was pretty much sobered up, and we were ready for a snack and bed. Joe called Eddie again, but still no response. Therefore, we got up and decided to leave. Right as we stood up, though, Eddie's doors flings open, and there's a portly, middle-aged woman standing in the doorway. She looks at us and says, "Oh, you must be looking for Eddie." We were all a little baffled by the woman, because we had knocked on the door a few times, and were also talking pretty loudly in the hallway, to be honest. Even stranger was Eddie's reaction when he saw us in the doorway. He literally flew to threshold and said, "How long have you been out here?" He told him a while, and he seemed shocked. Then I heard a voice I'll never forget beckon us to come in. As we walked into the room, the first thing I noticed was that it was icy cold, so cold, the window was sweating. The second thing I noticed was the woman on the bed. My first assumption was that Eddie had hired a prostitute and was just trying to play it cool in front of us or something. Then I noticed the bed had hardly been disturbed. As I looked at the woman, things began to get strange. I honestly couldn't tell her age. She had been 30, could have been, or 50? She was dressed way too nicely for the concert. She had a fitted dress on, and that was a deep purple, and beautiful black high heels. The thing that was really overwhelming was how perfect she was. She was tall, but not too tall. She was curvy, but perfectly curvy. Her breasts were big, but not too big. She had gorgeous toned legs. She had just enough makeup on, just enough perfume. Perfection. I soon realized that we had positioned ourselves around the room in a way that it seemed like she was holding court. The other woman in the corner by the room. I was sitting on the armrest of a chair that Jason was sitting on. Angie had sprawled out on the bed, and Joe was sitting at a small table with Eddie. The woman was perched on the edge of the bed, legs elegantly crossed. She greeted us and made small talk about the show before she started talking, and after I ruled out that she was a prostitute, I just assumed she was there to buy from Eddie. But the more she talked, the more I grew uneasy of the whole situation. She first turned to Angie and said something to the effect of, "Being a good girl from the Midwest, Angie is from Missouri and has an accent, but never mentioned where she was from." The woman then asked her if she had been at All Good, a music festival in Ohio. Ironically, Angie had been to All Good the previous summer, but hadn't said anything to the woman about it. I brushed this conversation off as pure coincidence. Then she moved to Jason and said, "You can tell you two are related, gesturing to Joe. Other than they're both tall, Jason and Joe don't really look alike. For instance, Joe has blue eyes and Jason has brown eyes. Also, their facial features are built vastly different. Again, no one said anything about being cousins all night, and Eddie hadn't met Jason before that night." Then she looked at me and said, "So, do you go to school together?" Gesturing to Angie. I told her yes and that we were roommates. She then said, "You have to be an art major," with a laugh. I was, but again, I didn't tell her, and Eddie had no clue what major I was. And then the strangest of all, she looks at Joe, and then looks at me and says, "You two are really sweet together. First of all, Joe was sitting across the room from me. Secondly, he had been the first person through the door and I was the last. There was basically no social cues that would lead her to believe that we were together. After a few more moments of conversation, she left with the other woman. Almost immediately after the door closed behind the woman, we all let out a collective "what the fuck?" Eddie, who had an unusually strong poker face, completely panicked. He broke into a cold sweat and asked us again how long we had been in the hallway. He told us he never heard the knock, nor any noise outside his room. We asked if he had lost his phone, and he looked puzzled. His phone was sitting on the table in his room, and no record of any of Joe's calls. We all began to get a little freaked out at this point. But Eddie seemed almost manic after he checked his phone. He told us that he had returned to the room immediately after the show. She apparently had posted up by his door with the other lady in tow. Eddie said she told him, "I've been waiting for you." He thought she wanted to buy something, and due to her appearance, invited her and the other woman inside. But he said she bought nothing from him and wasn't even interested in smoking pot with him. Apparently, she told him things about himself and even asked him about his father. He had never seen her before, and his father had been dead over 20 years. As he recounted his encounter, he began packing. He told us he was too freaked out and was going to go back home. We left after that as well and returned to our hotel. I think we might have said 4 words to each other on the ride back. To this day, I still have no explanation for this episode. Angie and I still talk about it every time I see her. I'm the first person to tell you that I try to rationalize everything that happens in my life, but this is one of those instances in which I cannot. I've never experienced something or someone like that. Maybe she is just incredibly observant. Maybe Eddie told her things and didn't remember. I don't know. What I do know is I've never felt anything like that in my life. I felt that I was truly in the presence of something otherworldly and overwhelmingly evil.